June 19, 2021. This is the All-American Podcast, and I'm your host, Paul Seawright. Ladies and gentlemen, today it should be clear to everyone paying attention that our country is facing a number of crises, whether economic, political, social, agricultural, demographic, and yes, even medical. This podcast episode today is of critical importance because we are going to talk about all of these things in our interview with Butch Erskine. It's of critical importance because we don't know how much time we have left to prepare for a confluence of all of these crises as we head into the latter part of the year. So emergency preparedness is the topic of the interview today as we discuss natural, man-made, and pre-planned crises like Agenda 2030 with our guest, Butch Erskine. Now, Butch is the author of preparedness books, Hope for Survival, How Food, Water, Shelter, and Security Could Save Your Life, and also The Mindset. These are two books that I highly recommend you get so you can learn what you need to be doing right now to prepare as time runs out. Now, Butch is a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran of 20 years and a speaker on emergency preparedness and disaster recovery. With over 39 years of experience in all facets of global security, vulnerability assessments, and emergency planning, Butch continues his efforts to focus on the spiritual and psychological foundation of the family and individual preparedness. So pay close attention and make sure that you look up Mr. Erskine after this interview so you can go and get some of his resources and become a part of his group. We'll be back with Butch Erskine right after the break. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute the podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, today we welcome Mr. Butch Erskine to the All-American Podcast. Butch, how are you today?
Paul, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm really glad to have you on the show. It's been a pleasure interacting with you over the past few weeks, and it was nice that you brought me on to speak to your group, which I was thankful for because it got me an opportunity not just to meet some great people, but to get some great questions about the presentation that I did. And I really thank you for that. And I am really just overjoyed to have you on the show and talk about a number of topics today. And of course, you run a website called hopeforsurvival.com, and you also have a YouTube channel, and you are focusing on prepping. So I'd like for you, if you could, tell us a little bit about how you got into prepping and what prompted you to launch your blog and your YouTube channel.
Absolutely. First, thank you for the invite to be here with you on your podcast. And we were happy to have you with us on our Thursday Zoom call. And it had great results. Folks I got a lot of feedback, and we hope to have you back again. So to your question, how did I get into prepping and to go forward to do the blog and the YouTube channel? I'll try to make this as short as possible. I had always through life kind of had in the back of my mind somewhat to serving in the military, and we always had to be prepared. So I was kind of trained that way and always kind of had that sense of responsibility in my life. And then after retiring, as I aged a little bit, matured, I, was witnessing changes in our country and the debt going up and a lot of political division throughout our country. So I started focusing on it a little more. And at the same time, in my day job, I work in emergency management. And I went back to school and got my master's in emergency management, disaster preparedness. And part of that, outside of the master's program, I was also taking lots of FEMA classes. And, I, over 2 or 3 years, had taken about 40 to 50 classes. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how the FEMA process worked. Of course, FEMA responds to the request of the state governor, or if it's a multi-state, they go to a regional response, and they bring resources to the area that's requested by the governor. And the big focus in the early stages of a disaster is going to be on critical infrastructure, and it makes perfect sense. We got to get roads open so crews can respond in, first responders can get into impacted areas, utilities, water, power, especially in some of the regions, if it's, extremely cold or extremely hot, it takes a toll on the citizens and can even lead to their death. So as I thought about it more and more, the one thing that stood out to me was, what about the folks that live across the street from us?
Mm-hmm.
If they are not injured, what are the programs to help them be prepared to sustain during the days or weeks or months of these events, mostly natural disasters? So I started thinking about it more and more, which led me to writing my first book, Hope for Survival: How Food, Water, Shelter, Security Could Save Your Life. And it's more of a work type manual to help you through the process of getting started in preparedness. And so you notice I use the word preparedness and not prepping.
Yes.
The reason I went that route, first of all, there was kind of a national stigma of the word prepping. People looked at the word prepping and thought of preppers as these doomsdayers.
No doubt about that.
Who were preparing for the big one, right?
Yes, yes.
And it's like, well, when did the last big one happen? And how much time has passed? And how many natural man-made type disasters have occurred since the last big one? So I went with the word preparedness because I'm focusing on trying to change mindsets for people to build this personal insurance policy of having the basics to survive during any type of natural, man-made, technological disaster. And if they lose a job, if they're injured in a car wreck, if they have an illness, anything that can change your life tomorrow from the basic routine that you have in your life now, right? So it's a self-reliant insurance policy that I try to focus on. And so I went down that route. So I wrote the book, and a couple other authors that I'm friends with or that I know. When I wrote the book, they encouraged me also to stand up a website, and I'm not an IT person. So anyway, I kind of self-taught myself. I started a website, and I focused the website as well around the book, and that's preparedness. I try to stay away from politics, since preparedness is my goal, to help other people. So my primary goal was to try to help the people that live across the street and around the corner to get prepared and start with a home and build it into a community of individuals who are around one another, who can work together to have this preparedness package. Well, so, and then from that, we created the Zoom, which you were a guest on. When COVID hit, last year and the lockdowns went into place, it was like, what can we do to keep these folks focused on their preparedness and trying to get their priorities in order? So we started Zoom, and we've had, I think, 57 weeks now of Zoom where we focus on the basics of preparedness. We focus on the Constitution, on leadership, getting people involved in their community at the community level, and school boards, councils, and things, town councils, and things like that. So that's kind of how it all started, and it continues. I never thought it would. I really never thought it would stay this strong. For we're working towards 3 years now.
Well, you've said a lot of great things in there, and I just want to kind of touch on some of them because one is the community aspect of preparedness, which I think there's a lot of people out there who think about survival, and I'm going to use the old term that you're getting away from, prepping, as something that they have a kind of a lone wolf fantasy about. But community is essential, isn't it?
Yes,
And
it is.
Can you touch on that a little bit? And getting back to that whole idea of the lone wolf prepper, people think that a 2012 catastrophe is going to happen. That's another issue you talked about, is waiting for the big one, the dramatic event that we all hear about, and then they're going to go off into the wild and trap rabbits and hunt deer and all this type of stuff and survive with their shotgun for the next 20 years. Can you talk a little bit about not just the daily events that can occur that you need to rely on your preparedness for, but also the community aspect of being prepared?
Sure. So in the series of classes that I put together that I teach, and also kind of walk you through one of them in the first book, but I built a preparedness 101 class, and that is for you, the individual. The preparedness 102 class is for team, node, tribe, community, how to go beyond yourself and start working towards building a community. And a lot of individuals, there's different ways folks go about it. The way that I go about it is I try to keep in mind everyone in every location is different. So we have to adapt and adjust to these things. You may be in an urban environment, you may be in a rural environment, or you may be in a neighborhood in suburbia. So adjusting to those has to play into the mindset. I have an acquaintance, Jonathan Hollerman, who runs Grid Down Consulting, and in his Grid Down book, he wrote in the book, he said, if you're going to be a lone wolf, make sure you have your driver's license in your shirt pocket, so when they find you dead, they'll know who you are. And that kind of sums it up. Whether you're in, no matter where you're at, it is, especially if it is a mid to long-term type event or disaster, surviving on your own alone is nearly impossible. I don't care what skills you have, but if you're in a mid to high threat level location, you have to sleep, you have to grow food, you may have to hunt, but at some point when you sleep, who's going to be watching your back, right? You cannot do all these tasks as a Lone Ranger. So that's where the community, the last class I built after 101 and 102 is called Protecting Your 5-Mile Radius. So what I do is I basically take Google Earth and I zoom into where your home's at, and I then do a simulated stretch out about 3.5 to 5 miles. And that's where you need to focus on. It's knowing who's around you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what is your political persuasion, because they're your neighbors. So you need to find a path that you can agree on and work together, because when things go bad, it's not going to matter what political party you're in for the most part. In extreme measures, yeah, it could play into it a little bit, but you want to know who's around you. Can you work with them? Can you trust them? And in order to do that, you've got to find a way to bond with them, spend time together with them. Um, I was talking to Jim Walton over at the PBN Prepper Broadcast Network a week or so ago. And one of the ways he suggested, which was brilliant, was to start a community garden.
Ah, yeah, it's a great idea.
Get individuals to come to first of all see who's willing to come out and help. That's a good sign right there, if they will or if they won't. And spend time together learning a skill, learning how to grow, learning how to read your soil, and then what do you do with your resources after you grow them? You may need them right now. You may share them, or you can can them. Right? It's another good skill to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then those individuals who will not participate for whatever reason, that's good knowledge to have as well. Because if things go south, you're going to want to know who around you refuse to help. And the likelihood is that in most cases, they're going to have about 24 hours to 72 hours of food available. They could then become a problem.
Well, let me ask you
and
a
those
little
are things that you're going to know. Yeah.
Yes, let me ask you a question about this because, I think that's a great idea as a way to find people who will contribute to your local community preparedness. But when you are planning on starting some sort of a group like this or looking at your neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
how do you approach them and how do you express the importance of doing something like starting a community garden or providing some sort of community preparedness group? What are the steps to that?
Well, like I said, the community garden is one way. Another way, you can have neighborhood grill outs. You can have in the fall season, you can have chili night and invite neighbors out to it, meet one another. You don't even have to talk about the subject of preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
You can just kind of talk along the lines of different topics. For example, hey, I want to take my kids out to a firing range. Is there one close by?
Mm-hmm.
See who speaks up and knows where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to tell you most likely they're an individual that has home protection, and they're teaching that to their family. So that's someone to keep in mind. Or the individual who walks away from the conversation. That could mean two things. One is that they have no interest in it, which means they have most likely no home protection, which tells you a lot of other things. Or they just do not want to reveal that amongst the group.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other ways you can go about is you can find a local gun club and you can go there, and oftentimes you can meet like-minded individuals who also are into preparedness, or they can introduce you to people, and you're trying to find individuals that are in that community where you're located at. Another easy way, and it's kind of how we went about it in our community, is you don't have to approach it as it being something that you created, meaning the federal government, who so many people, probably 90% of our populace, is dependent and reliant upon for information, answers, resolving issues, fixing things, providing checks, and so forth. 90% of our population flat out depends on the government for basically everything. So we printed out documents from the federal government that said, hey, the federal government is saying you need to have at least 2 weeks of food, or the document that came out during President Obama's reign the last year that came out, Homeland Security came out and suggested, because of vulnerabilities to the power grid, it was recommended that Americans have up to 6 months food and water reserve. So we basically said this was a few months back, but things in the country are turbulent right now, and the federal government has recommended these items, and we're basically kind of cross-checking in our neighborhood to just remind folks you might want to take this information to heart and do same. And then we use FEMA documents, FEMA at ready.gov, one of the programs FEMA has run to try to get communities involved and prepared. So it wasn't us saying it, it was the federal government saying, these are things that you might want to consider. We printed these documents out and we passed them out to our neighborhood. That was an easy in. Mm-hmm. It's not us telling you to do it. The federal government's telling you to do it, right? So a lot of what I'm doing is paralleling FEMA programs that are tailored more towards the individuals who, if they don't have life-threatening injuries during a disaster, or if they have, like I said, a loss of job, a car accident, or a long-term illness, I'm trying to focus in on those folks to help them in their home and their community to become self-reliant, mm-hmm. to be prepared.
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about some of these types of events that can affect people, and you've mentioned a few of them, and those are things that can happen to anyone, anytime. You could yes. get injured and by a car hit, crash, or whatever. But there are also some broader things that we're kind of concerned about as well. And I'm wondering, what do you see as some of the larger, more macro type events that you think are a threat to us in the coming months and years?
Good question. So here's how I go about it. At the start of each month, I, in our Zoom group, and I've offered this as well in a weekly newsletter to the overall Hope for Survival followers that read the newsletter that don't participate in the group. I have been doing this for years. I learned to do this when I was working as a security advisor in special operations in the last years of the military. I do a monthly threat matrix. And I basically look at global events, national events, and events within the 5-mile radius of my home. So to answer your question, what I look at globally, I primarily I look at everything, but right now my top 3 are China, Russia, and Iran. On the national level, I look at debt, supply chain issues, political discourse in our country, religious and racial division, and I also focus on weather events. Things, we're in hurricane season right now. We have droughts out in the western United States. We've been having, oddly enough, we had some minor earthquakes up in the New Jersey area recently. So I look at everything, but those are the main ones I look at on a national level. And then I ask the question, how can any of these events impact my life or my community's life at the local level? So at the local level, right now, I would say I look at unemployment, increasing prices for fuel and food, rising crime, supply chain breakdowns. The system that we use in the United States now, grocery stores, gasoline for gas stations, and pharmaceuticals, they're supplied on a 72-hour need. So if we have some type of event, like recently in the Southeast, the Colonial gas line pipeline impacted fuel flow.
What a hit that was. Yeah.
So that, and then the JBS and the food thing, folks may have noticed in certain parts of the country, if they go into grocery stores and look hard, they'll notice that the shelves are not stacked from front all the way to the back. They're pulling all the resources to the front, and there's a lot of empty space behind them. So on a local level, if the 18 wheelers, depending how far you are from a distribution point or a city, if the 18 wheelers stop rolling and they cannot bring in the resupplies, your community has 72 hours of resources.
Well,
When they're gone, they're gone.
I'd like to touch on that for just a minute because
Yes.
the collapse of the food supply, in addition to the fuel supply, you're right. People saw a huge impact of these two events, one from Colonial and another from the food supply that got stressed when the whole government lockdowns happened in
Yes.
2020. And I'm curious, the food supply is how much of an ongoing threat is that? And what do you forecast for the food supply in the coming months? Because I think this is something that is going to touch a lot of people, and it is one of the most important things people can do is have an adequate food supply. What is causing this, and do you think it's going to continue?
I do have concerns with the food issue. This was happening before 2020. If you go back over the last 3 to 5 years and you look at the natural disasters that occurred just in the United States. We had the droughts out on the West Coast. They were moving cattle as much as they couldn't slaughter and that didn't die. They were trying to relocate it to down around the Texas region. And then right after that, Texas had the droughts and had the fires. We had massive flooding in the Midwestern United States that impacted crops 2 to 3 years in a row. The current droughts out west right now, a lot of the farmers are not even planting crops at all because of the drought. And the drought is basically from Arizona to Washington and about 3 to 4 states inland. This is going to have a huge impact on prices, on availability. I look at that factor, and I also look at the factor of a lot of the regions where food is grown that is then shipped into the United States as well. Issues they've been having south of the border. There's droughts been in those regions as well. Another issue that's potentially impacting our ability to have continuous food flow is workers. You look across America right now, there is a shortage of workers and there's a shortage of truck drivers for long haul and the rising fuel cost. So there's a number of factors that contribute and could contribute even more to how our supply chain of food is impacted. That's not even mentioning a shortage of resources that's been ongoing for a year now. I think it was last September, I told the folks over on the Hope for Survival Zoom call, you need to make sure that your preparedness resources are in place now, because they're projecting that food could rise 50 to 75% in cost by the spring, summer of 2021.
Well, and that's a pretty horrifying projection.
Yeah. So there's a shortage of resources to make the cans to put foods in. So there's a number of issues that could break that supply chain. And once that supply chain is impacted, they can't just snap their finger and make it all better overnight. It takes time. You got to have the resources to put the food in. You got to have the food to put in the cans or packaging. You got to have truckers to move it across the country. They got to have fuel in their trucks to be able to afford it. It's so there's all kind of potentials, and as with about every natural disaster that we see, just in the last year and a half, the beginning of coronavirus, right at COVID-19, is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have an invisible threat that could potentially kill people, and 90% of our populace is running into the stores to buy toilet paper, right?
Yes.
So the and it's kind of humorous because the media is like, well, the preppers ran out and bought it all. Well, actually, that's not really true, because those who are prepared, they already have these resources.
So true.
They've bought them along the line, along a period of time, and put them away. So when the 90%ers are running towards it, the 10%ers who are prepared are running away from it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it does show you how quickly shortages can just materialize, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about the store shelves also kind of being thin anyway because of the lack of food production, and I guess a lot of the grocery stores are trying to cover this up somehow so it doesn't appear that the shortages are bad as they are. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, there's and I think from everything that I've been told from individuals in different regions, different parts of the country are seeing different things. When a couple of weeks ago when we had the fuel shortage, I talked to due to Colonial. I talked to two or three truck drivers hauling fuel, and they just kind of laughed and said, "There's not a fuel shortage."
Mm.
The problem is that the news of the pipeline went out through the media, and people panic. So we have a larger number of people purchasing scheduled fuel, and when there's more buying it, they can't just snap their finger and trucks come from around the corner.
Interesting. It was like a bank run in some ways.
Yes, on fuel. Mm-hmm. You've witnessed all the increased pricing on lumber. It's interesting because you used to could buy a nice sheet of plywood for under $20, and last I priced it was like $58 a sheet. Now, and when you ask the question, well, why is there a shortage? You find out there's an abundance of resources. It's just not being shipped from the providers out to the locations where it's sold. Mm-hmm. So the question is why? Why are these distributors being told to sit on their resources? We look in the automotive industry. We look at how we're so dependent upon resources being built outside the country, just like we're relying on food coming in from outside the country. Cars, a number of, I believe Ford, possibly maybe Chevy, GM. Right now, their production lines are basically near halt because they can't get the key chips or the brains to put into the new automobiles. So a lot of your dealerships are buying up used cars to resell because they can't get these parts. I've heard the same with resources to put into new homes that are being built. Simple things like doorknobs and lights, vanity lights. It's all imported. So
yes, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking about the fact that you have, on one hand, labor shortages, then you have potential hacking. Who is doing the hacking is a topic all into itself. Then you have the fact that you have globalist suppliers, foreign suppliers of goods, who may or may not be affected by demand shocks and also the COVID, for example, and other government rules and regulations that affect all this. So, do you see that this is something that is structural, that's going to be long lasting, or does your forecast say that eventually we're going to get past this? What are you looking at time wise here?
one of the things I try to monitor is policies coming out of the federal government. I also try to monitor relationships and communications between the United States and foreign countries that are providers of key resources to us. So that and cost also a player. I mean, politics, like everywhere I go, whether here in the southeastern United States, especially in the mid to smaller communities, the number of now I'm not talking during 2020, 20% of the businesses in the United States closed their doors for good. 20%.
That's absolutely crazy.
Those are families. Many of them were conservative families, family-owned businesses that are now out of business. How are they going to survive? Maybe they had another skill or something they could do, but those are individuals that have to figure out a way to survive. But I go through these communities and I sometimes put it in my newsletter, the number of small stores and restaurants that are closed for good. Even right now, the number of like Wendy's, Hardee's, Bojangles, these type national chains that will close up their doors for a week, 2 weeks, a month, because they can't find anyone to work. Because the employees are making more from government checks than what the employer will pay them. So why go to work? So we're not only lacking willing employees, we're also changing a mindset.
That's true. A mindset of dependency now.
Yes, more people are, again, dependent upon the federal government without any consideration to the growing massive debt or any thought to someone's got to pay this money off in taxes, so all these are contributors. There's so many different spokes in the wheel that can break, and I sometimes get a chuckle when I think, my grandparents and great grandparents, they were preparers because it was their way of life.
Yep.
They had cellars with canned food, and they always had enough food to get them by during tough times. And now it's like you try to educate people that there's so many potential ways that the system or the supply chain can fail, and how are you going to survive to take care of your family when that happens? Whether it's personal debt, whether it's national debt, and we could get into the whole Agenda 2030 thing from formerly Agenda 21. That's a whole nother day. I would just encourage people to go read Agenda 2030, and you will find a lot of what you're witnessing nationally and globally in that document that will help you make sense of a lot of things. Like, for example, there's right now the rising cost of beef and pork. I was watching a video last week of a rancher out in the Midwest who was saying that if things don't change quickly, we could be seeing $25 and $30 a pound for beef, and that pork's not going to be any better. So there's, at the same time, you see, just recently I was told that now Jimmy Dean is even offering a form of plant-based sausage, right? And there's already other types that are out there. So there's a push to get your mindset changed to being willing to not eat beef or pork or chicken and switch to these organic, plant-based items. Well, if you go read Agenda 2030, it's all in there. That is one of the goals to achieve. So
Yeah. Yep.
there's big pieces that are feeding into some of the things that we're seeing throughout the country. Personally, to answer your question, I place everything in my faith. Through all this, I haven't had stress. I have concern. I don't see it getting any better. I just don't see it getting, even if President Trump pops out of the magic hat like some believe may happen,
Mm-hmm.
and if it does, it does.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, today, folks are so focused on Washington, D.C., and they're forgetting to take care of their own preparedness and self-reliance at home. And anyone that has a child at home, I would not want to be that parent when their young child looks at them and tells them, "Mommy, Daddy, I'm hungry. Why don't we have any food?"
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes. I think you hammered this point perfectly. Stop looking at Washington, D.C. and look at what's happening in your neighborhood, in your home, in your community. And the reference to Agenda 2030, I'm glad you made that point, because it is an agenda. It is an agenda that's been out there for years.
Yes.
And we're seeing this now with the whole Green New Deal and other sorts of policies that are being adopted nationally and globally. And the whole thing about getting people off of meat is a real concern, because they do want people on plant-based things. And not only that, it'll all be GMO, and it will all be very high in estrogen, by the way, when they give you all these soy substitutes and things like that. I think it's a great deal of concern, especially for not just for your own health and strength, but there's also a depopulation agenda tied into this, in my view. And if you're not getting the necessary protein or strength, and you're being laden with estrogen products, that's a problem for fertility as well. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but that's just a little bit of a tangent that I wanted to take, because it is a concern in my view. What do you think?
Well, one of the hardest, for me personally, running the Hope for Survival website and Zoom and communicating with individuals, and trying to, like we said, get them to focus on the local level, know what's going on, but don't lose sleep over it. You're not going to change Washington, D.C.
That's right.
It is what it is.
That's a fact.
And we have been working in our Zoom group for 6 months or so. We had Dr. Proctor from Provis Institute come in and teach a class on the Constitution. We focused on the Constitution, we focused on leadership, but we've been drilling down and trying to encourage individuals to step out of their box and get involved at the local community. If you want to change things, you need to start in your local community. First thing, you need to know who your sheriff is. Where does your sheriff stand on protecting your constitutional amendments and your rights?
Amen.
Get involved in your school board. If you don't like what your children are being taught, go to the school board meetings, voice your concern. If you're outnumbered, retreat and go back with the majority.
And also try to run for school board as well,
to support you.
And try to run for school
board
on these boards, people.
If you want to make change, be a part of the change. If you're not willing to do that, then you really can't complain about it, you know?
Right.
And I've always kind of had this feeling, or kind of a question. One of the gentlemen who works with me for Hope for Survival, I've shared with him for months. I'm not convinced that the conservative base are willing to walk past their mailbox. They'll sit in their home, and throw their shoes at the TV because they don't like what they hear. while they're getting steamrolled. We have the Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights, we have the Department of Justice, we have laws to protect our rights. Yes, we do. But at the same time, the other side seems to be ignoring it.
Mm-hmm.
And they are rolling at a fast pace, basically doing and taking anything because there's no resistance in the proper channels. So we've been focusing in on that, trying to get folks to understand. You can't complain and fight it if you don't understand it. So years back, we talked about Agenda 21, which then was Wilderness Corridor, Agenda 2030. I mean, Paul, there's so many things around right now that are taking place. The robotics that's replacing man and women in the jobs. This was all part of a plan. And you know what? I'm not telling you this. I read it, and you can go read it too, right?
Absolutely.
When former Senator Harry Reid laughed when he said, I think we should pay him $15 to work fast food, he knew it was short-lived because he knew what was coming shortly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically putting in all these kiosks and replacing the employee.
Yes.
Right. So now we have another group of individuals, mostly high school, college age, and senior citizens who work in these jobs to try to make ends meet. Well, those jobs are going away, and if you a really good book, if you haven't read it, called Technocracy, outstanding book. But this has all been part of the plan for many years. Get people out of the rural environment, move them into an urban environment, put them in a small pod, 600 square foot box.
Yes.
The movement right now is to put everyone on equal turf. And if we go to a digital currency, you're going to see a lot of that, where to have equality, there won't be, other than the wealthy individuals who are sitting back saying, hey, you all are eating up all of our food and drinking our water and making the world not such a good place. So we're going to bring you all down to an equal level. And I know it sounds crazy to some people, but if they would take the time to read and get educated on it, we would have a much powerful force out voicing our displeasure to what the wealthy are planning.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The information is there for anybody who wants to see it. I even put a lot of documents that are put out by think tanks and government agencies on my own website, and it amazes me how people just don't care to open a document that's been published stating exactly what you're saying. They will listen to mainstream media, for example, who will discredit these ideas and these thoughts and publication, the ideas in the publications, but the publications actually do exist.
Yes.
They're not a conspiracy theory. These are real, and you can go read them yourself. So I guess overcoming apathy and also overcoming this idea that we can be spoon-fed information that is unbiased is just an incorrect assumption to make. People have to get out and read things themselves. And I'm kind of going somewhere with this, which is a lot of folks have not bothered to prepare. And I'm curious what you think happens with those. Do they end up in the mega cities on universal basic income, or do they experience some other fate?
That's a good question, Paul. I look at Generation Z, and I don't blame them, because this is a system they've been educated on through public schools.
True.
Right. And when they're not in school, most of the school systems are now using all kind of computer systems, iPads, virtual reality type scenario training and things of that nature. Our kids are using this stuff at home, right? Yep. So if a kid is spending 2 and 3 hours an evening, and now they're a teenager, and now they're having to face the workforce, but they can get a check that says, I'll pay you more to stay home, and you can play your games all day or whatever you do with virtual reality. Mm-hmm. If leadership or the government comes along and says, hey, you know what? You don't ever have to work. We're going to move you over here and put you in this 600-foot box, and we're going to give you a set of virtual reality goggles, and you can do and be anything you want to be. If you want to be a race car driver, if you want to be a frog, a butterfly, you're going to be equal to everyone around you. So if you got bullied, you're now equal, right? Yeah. Or if you were poor growing up, you don't have to worry about that anymore. We're going to take care of it. Put these goggles on, make yourself happy, and we'll give you the basics of what you need to survive on. You won't need a car because we're going to provide electric public transportation. And I know that sounds crazy, but you can go read it for yourself, you know?
You're right. I mean, I'm laughing.
It's out there.
Yeah, it is. I laugh because it is humorous, but it's true. And what's sad is that I think a lot of people would be satisfied to have that kind of existence, which just opens the door for greater control over society and the potential for heightened tyranny. It's pretty sad.
6 months or so ago, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. Actually, I think it was an interview with Patrick Wood, who wrote Technocracy. And if someone said in 20 years, what will be the most needed skill by a human for employment? And it was a counselor, because robotics is going to replace almost everything. Mm-hmm. And they're going to need counselors to brief all the humans who were, high level engineering and things of that nature, and as crazy as this sounds, you look at big tech today and how wealthy and how much power they have. How long will it be before nations are no longer going to really need governments?
Right. Yep.
Because of the power of big tech.
Big tech, artificial intelligence.
Yes. I mean, there's so much more to this with the AI and the VR and the 5G, how much information is being collected and fed into a central point or a central brain. Mm-hmm. That the robot control center, robotics, is going to be so much more intelligent and processing so much faster than a human can come close to.
Right.
I've heard several CEOs on podcasts who are part of this, but they have fear because much of what we're witnessing in the development of everything is smart now are the younger folks, and they have no regard for security.
Mm-hmm. This is true. Absolutely
right.
True. Absolutely true.
And at what point does man lose control?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I have my faith side of it, and this is strictly earthly speaking, but you can't even I can't even come close to discussing these things with most people in preparedness, especially if they have less than 5 years. Getting so much of preparedness is a mental aspect in the beginning. As I wrote in my second book, The Mindset, which was totally about you and how you see and process things. I have folks that email me that the information is stressing them out and they can't sleep at night.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, man, you don't even have hardly the beginning of what's going on out there.
Right.
And this is America, Paul. This is the people that live across the street and around the corner from. This is our family members.
Mm-hmm.
They look at you like you're a cuckoo bird when you start talking to them about this stuff. And it's like, if you would only take time and turn off the cable network and start reading, you would see how the wool has been put over your eyes for years and you're being set up.
Absolutely. And the message I have to people who get scared by this, for me personally, is look, information is the ultimate power, and you want to have that information. So if you find yourself equipped with knowledge, you'll know how to handle these situations better. So don't be afraid of it, and don't turn away from it. Go out and seek more knowledge and more information.
Yes. 90% of preparedness is awareness.
Yes.
So load yourself with information, change your mindset to accepting that preparing is a need. It's an insurance policy, and then go forth. One of the biggest things that I try and encourage people to, without getting too personal with them, is because everyone's different. Their income levels are different, so every case is different. But to the best one can, get out of debt.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
Because what a lot of folks, they don't have a choice because they got in debt and they've never been able to overcome that debt. But every time you go get a loan, those interest rates that you're paying is feeding this beast.
Mm-hmm.
In the big picture. Get out of debt. Don't let them control you. You want to be able to control yourself. Make decisions for you and your family and not be controlled by interest rates and payments that you have to make to survive. So get out of debt, and then start, once you've adapted the mindset, start working. You don't need a month if you don't have a week. Start working, get a week's worth of food and water, put back, work on 2 weeks up to a month, and then build it to 6 months, and so on. So you can't run before you crawl, and you got to walk before you run.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this, because you're getting into some good details about planning your preparedness out, and getting out of debt is one, and stocking up your food is another one. And in that order, it sounds like you're saying. And I'm wondering, are there any other things that people can and should focus on if they're just now becoming aware and saying, look, I better get prepared for any contingency coming my way? What are some of the other things that people should be looking at besides getting out of debt and getting their food supplies up?
Yeah. So one of the big mistakes, I believe, and this is just my opinion of many out there, one of the areas I believe folks make mistakes is they go out and they spend thousands of dollars and they buy pallets of stuff. You need to build plans first.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know what to buy if you haven't built a plan? What does your plan require you to have? What do you plan to do with that plan? So I work with people on building like a family communication plan. If you've got 5 people in your household and you're at 5 different locations and something happens during the day, what is your plan to get back together? If you've lost the ability to communicate, so I help them build what we call a PACE plan, a primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. Right. So if you and I have a plan, the primary may be we text. The alternate may be desk phone. The contingency may be email, and the emergency may be I come right to your workplace and put a note on your car.
Mm-hmm.
And you do this for all the members of your family and where the rally point is, where you're going to meet up. If you have young children, who's going to take care of going to where that child's at and get them? Because you might be on foot. Something may have happened, say such as a CME or an EMP, that automobiles won't work.
Yeah.
So what is your plan, and what routes, where are you walking through, right? And then it gets into the whole topic of everyone needs to have a day bag. You need to have a bag in your vehicle that you can get to that has a 3 day supply of what you need: walking shoes, maybe boots, seasonal clothing, medications, water, um, foods for protein, for energy. And we have all this stuff on the website, different checklists and so forth. And then we have what's called a bug out bag. That means you're never going back home again. So we build what's called, we use the 5-5-5 plan, which is 5 second, 5 minute, or 5 hour. If you have an emergency in your home, say you wake up at 3 a.m., your smoke alarms are going off. Again, this is not like the doomsday. There's a fire in your home, or something is chasing you out of your home, and you have 5 seconds to get out. You have bags packed, right?
Smart.
For each individual.
Yes.
If it's 3 a.m. in December and you go outside and it's sleeting, and now you're wet and you're cold and you have nothing with you, now you have another problem, right? So we encourage the bags. We encourage people to possibly set up a cache of extra clothing, blankets, putting aside some cash, some food. So if you do lose everything, you have a backup. So one of the things I constantly drill in people is 1 is none, 2 is 1, and 3 is better.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a secondary plan and resource to back up everything primary that you're dependent upon, right? So, and in addition to food, water, shelter, clothing, and all that in your bag, my wife and I have what we call a football bag, and we encourage this for everyone. You need, and now with so much digital, everything that you own that you need to prove who you are, you need to have it copied. If you have original documents, put them in a fireproof safe, or have them at an alternate location, maybe a lockbox somewhere. But you need to have like printouts from your bank, mortgages, deeds, titles, birth certificates, passports, social security cards, driver's license, and store them on a thumb drive or something like that. And everywhere we go, one of us has that with us outside of our home.
Well, that is absolutely great advice. And I noticed that Butch, we're running up against our timeline here, but before we go, I do want to make sure people know where to go to get in contact with you, how they can get involved in your Zoom meetings, and what other resources you have available, like your books. Could you talk about that for just a minute, please?
Sure, sir. Thank you. You can find our website. It's at https://www.hopeforsurvival.com. You can email me at preparedness101@protonmail.com. And in the subject line, if you would just put that you're emailing me from hearing this podcast, which will help me a lot. We have the website. We do the Zoom call. I also go mobile and teach families and communities, building community teams in about 6 or 7 states right now. I'm going in July. I'll be down in Central South Carolina at a church training about 75 to 100 people on setting up a community team. I do vulnerability assessments of homes and farms and properties. It doesn't matter if you're urban, rural, or suburban. The concepts are the same pretty much. It's just changing your mindset a little bit to help you. Whether it's an apartment, a duplex, or wherever you may live. There's hope out there. That's why it's called Hope for Survival. Everything that we do, we try to do with encouragement, and we try to do with hope in mind. Because if the big doomsday does ever happen, we want to be a part of those who survive, so we can be part of rebuilding the community afterwards. The two books, Hope for Survival, is more how food, water, shelter, security could save your life. It is a spiral bound. It's kind of more of a manual that walks you through setting up food, water, shelter, security. I talk EMPs, medicinal plants, some essential oils, and things of that nature. The second book is Hope for Survival, the Mindset, which strictly focuses on you, the individual, to try to encourage you to start thinking like a 10%er. And we try to get folks to live outside the box, to be able to see verbal and nonverbal things before they happen to them, to keep them left of bang. Bang is the threat to you. It could be numerous things, but we want to keep you left of bang so you can react and protect yourself and your family before walking or driving into bang.
Wonderful.
And they're sold on the website, on the front page of the website. I sell them direct. And the proceeds from the book goes to charity. I don't keep any of the proceeds once I pay the printing cost of it. We support a local food bank to feed unemployed and homeless. Paul, it's been great. We could talk for hours. These are great topics.
Well, I definitely want to have you back, and I didn't know that I didn't know you were giving your proceeds to charity. That is phenomenal, and I seriously commend you on that. That's an amazing thing, and it's rare that you hear something like that. Somebody gives all their proceeds to charity like that. It's beautiful. But Butch Erskine, a wealth of information and knowledge you've provided us with today. I really appreciate it all. You've caused me to think quite a bit today. And you're right. There's so many more topics that we need to get into, and I think we will. We definitely should. So I want to have you back where we can have a little more time to get into some of these other topics. And a message to people out there, folks, you have to take this stuff seriously, because time to prepare is running out economically, and when it comes to just the available time left anyway before we might experience some type of economic catastrophe. You got to get on this, take it seriously, look up Butch's website, go and get into his Zoom meetings and sign up for some of his services. He's really going to help you learn where to begin and how to map out your plan. Butch, thank you once again for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Paul. Thank you. And we appreciate you as well. And thanks for the service that you're doing out here, trying to cover topics that are important to our country and to our citizens.
Thank you, sir. And I wish for you a wonderful weekend.
You too. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day.
Be blessed.